There's a word that most adults in the middle of it refuse to use, not because it doesn't fit. Because it fits too well. Loneliness, said out loud. It sounds like a diagnosis, like an admission that something fundamental has gone wrong, in you, specifically, in a way it hasn't gone wrong in other people. So most people don't say it. They say they've been busy, they say they haven't had time to see people, they say things are fine. Today, that word gets a different frame. And the frame changes everything. Because here is what the science actually says about loneliness. Not the cultural story, not the self-help version, but what researchers who have spent decades studying this have found when they put lonely people in brain scanners and looked at what was actually happening. Your brain is not wrong. It is doing exactly what an evolved social organism's brain is supposed to do when it detects that something critical is missing. The pain is real. The signal is legitimate. And the shame, the specific shame of feeling this, of being someone who feels this, that shame was never part of the design. That is what this video is going to take apart. Not to make the loneliness disappear, but to change your relationship to it completely. Let's begin with something that most people don't know, or know intellectually, but haven't yet let themselves actually absorb. Loneliness is a pain signal, not metaphorically, not like pain. Neurologically, in the same category as physical pain, processed in overlapping regions of the brain, activating some of the same neural pathways, producing some of the same measurable responses in the body. Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA ran a series of studies where participants were socially excluded, left out of a simple computer game while in a brain scanner, and what the scans showed stopped researchers cold. The regions that lit up were the same regions that light up when the body is in physical pain, not similar. Overlapping, which means the next time you feel that specific ache, the one that shows up on a Sunday evening or at the end of a day full of calls and messages, or in the middle of a crowded room where you are somehow unreachable, you are not being dramatic. You are experiencing something your nervous system is classifying in the same category as a broken bone. Now think about why that would be the case. Human beings are a social species, not in the casual sense, in the deep biological sense. For most of human history, isolation meant death. Being separated from the group meant no protection, no food sharing, no one to watch your back. So evolution built in a warning system. The same system that says your hand is in fire, move it. That system also says you are isolated, reconnect. Pain motivates behavior change. That's the entire point of pain. The loneliness signal is working exactly as it was designed to work. It exists to push you back toward connection. It is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that you are a social organism who has been separated from what social organisms need. John Cacioppo, who spent 30 years studying loneliness at the University of Chicago and became the field's defining researcher, described loneliness as the social equivalent of hunger. Hunger doesn't mean you're weak. It means your body is doing its job of telling you it needs something. Loneliness means the same thing. The signal is not the problem. The signal is the messenger. And the loneliness signal doesn't just hurt. It changes how you operate. When the brain detects prolonged social isolation, it shifts into a specific mode. Researchers call it hypervigilance to social threat. What that means in practice: you become more attuned to potential rejection, more sensitive to ambiguous social signals, more likely to read a neutral face as unfriendly, more likely to interpret a slow text reply as confirmation of something you already feared. And here is the part that matters. That specific heightened state is not irrational. It is not anxiety disorder. It is not your personality. It is adaptive. If you are a prehistoric human and you are isolated, cut off from your group, the correct survival strategy is to be extremely alert to any sign of further rejection or threat, because another misstep could be fatal. The brain that kept people alive in that context is the same brain running your social life in 2025. It doesn't know you're at a work happy hour. It knows you have been isolated for a long time and that social situations carry risk. So it runs the threat detection protocol automatically, without asking. This is the specific reason that well-intentioned advice, just go to more events, put yourself out there, tends to produce exactly the experience it promised to prevent. You go. The threat detection system goes with you. You spend the evening monitoring, reading, assessing, not connecting. And then you leave having confirmed, once again, that these things don't work for you. Except it was never about you. It was about a nervous system doing its job in a context it wasn't designed for. The research on chronic loneliness and cortisol levels is consistent on this. Prolonged isolation elevates baseline stress hormones, which means a chronically lonely person isn't just in pain, they are physiologically primed for defensiveness in the exact situations where openness is required. This is not a character description, this is a biological feedback loop. And feedback loops can be interrupted. But before we get to what interrupts it, there is one more thing to name, because it is the piece that most content skips, and it is the piece that is doing the most damage. Everything described so far, the pain, the hypervigilance, the heightened threat detection, the cortisol, all of that is the loneliness signal doing its job. Difficult, real, legitimate. But here is what the science did not build into that system. The shame. The specific shame of being a person who is lonely in a world that seems to expect you not to be. The particular self-prosecution of someone who asks, "Why can't I figure this out when everyone else seems to have?" The quiet conviction that the loneliness is a verdict, that it reveals something about your fundamental worth as a person. That shame is not a biological feature, it is a cultural addition. It was layered on top of a legitimate pain signal by a culture that treats loneliness as embarrassing, as evidence of social failure in a world that prizes connectivity. In a world where you can have 400 followers and somehow still be completely unreachable to another human being. The Surgeon General's 2023 Advisory on Loneliness, a rare federal-level acknowledgement that this is a public health crisis, pointed directly at this. That the stigma around loneliness is one of the primary forces preventing people from seeking connection. Not the loneliness itself, the shame about the loneliness. And here is the specific way that shame makes everything harder. The loneliness signal was designed to push you toward reconnection, toward reaching out, toward taking the risk of being seen. The shame tells you that being seen is the one thing you cannot afford. Because if someone saw the full picture, the quiet evenings, the Sunday spirals, the inbox full of surface-level messages, they would confirm what you already suspect. So the signal says, reach out. And the shame says, but what if reaching out exposes you? And those two things together produce the specific paralysis that is probably more familiar to you than either one alone. This is what the science makes clear. And this is the thing worth actually absorbing. Your brain was not wrong. The loneliness signal was doing its job correctly. It was pointing you toward exactly what you needed. The shame was the intruder. The shame was the thing that took a functional signal and turned it into a closed loop. Not your fault, and also not your sentence. Because what was learned, the specific shame reflex, the self-prosecution, the assumption that the loneliness is diagnostic, that was a response to a cultural environment, not a biological inevitability. And responses to environments can change when the environment changes, or when the understanding of the environment changes. Like right now, if this opened something, if the frame of the signal versus the shame landed in a way that makes you want to go further into the structural picture, there's a resource built exactly for that in the description. It takes the science covered here and extends it into the full map of what actually dismantled your social world, and why none of it was ever the right verdict about you. The link is below. And it's also in the pinned comment. Now, here's what shifts when you actually take this in. Here is the objection that deserves a direct answer. This is interesting, but knowing it doesn't make it go away. I understand the biology now and I'm still here. That's right. It doesn't make it go away. Understanding that hunger is a metabolic signal does not make you less hungry. Understanding that the loneliness signal is legitimate does not immediately produce connection, but it does something more specific, something that actually matters for what happens next. It removes the secondary layer, the loneliness itself, the signal, the ache, the specific awareness of absence. That is one thing, heavy, but singular. The shame on top of it, the self-prosecution, the "what does this say about me?" the treating of the signal as a verdict, that is a second thing, running simultaneously, consuming the energy that the signal was designed to redirect toward connection. When the shame layer goes, not because you forced it, but because you genuinely understood that it was never part of the biological design, what's left is still hard. But it is navigable in a way the combined weight was not. There's a specific thing that tends to happen in people who internalize this frame. Not in a performance of healing way, but actually, they stop spending energy defending themselves against their own feelings. The hypervigilance doesn't disappear overnight. The threat detection mode doesn't reset in a week, but the additional layer, the layer that was using their own intelligence against them, building the case that the loneliness meant something permanent, that layer loses its authority. And without that layer running in the background, the signal can do what it was designed to do: point toward the people who might matter, motivate the reach, make the risk of genuine contact feel proportionate rather than existentially dangerous. You already understand this better than you think. The version of you that has been treating their own loneliness like evidence of a permanent condition, that version was responding reasonably to a story that was never accurate. The science was always pointing somewhere else, toward a different interpretation of the same experience. Not, something is wrong with me, but something is missing that I need, and my brain is correctly telling me so. That's not a small reframe. That is a completely different starting point. If the distinction between the signal and the shame opens something you want to take further, the resource in the description and the pinned comment builds out the full structural picture. Exactly what happened, exactly why it makes sense, and what comes next. When did you first start treating your loneliness like it was evidence of something? And what would it have changed to hear this framing earlier? What we named today is not a minor distinction. The difference between my loneliness means something is wrong with me, and my loneliness is a legitimate biological signal doing exactly its job. That difference changes the entire terrain of what is possible, not because it solves anything, because it removes the thing that was working against the solution. This signal was always pointing the right direction, toward real contact, toward the specific risk of being seen by another person without the performance, without the editing, without the gap between how you communicate online and who you actually are in a room. The shame was the one pointing the wrong way, back inward, back toward self-prosecution, back toward treating the pain as diagnostic rather than what it always was. A legitimate, evolved, non-negotiable signal from a social organism that needs what social organisms need. Your brain was not wrong. It has never been wrong. It has been running the exact protocol it was designed to run in exactly the conditions you have been living in. The question was never whether you were capable of connection. The question was whether anyone would explain to you what was actually happening, clearly enough that you could stop using your own intelligence to build a case against yourself. The shame was never yours to carry. It was handed to you by a culture that treats loneliness as embarrassing rather than as what it is, one of the most human signals the brain is capable of producing. You were never broken. You were a person experiencing real pain who was handed the wrong story about what that pain meant. Now you have a different story. And a different story is a different starting point. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the whole thing.